Welcome. We've been calling these a Cannaconvo episode of my podcast Cannabis last week for Global Cannabis Times, but I'm kind of want to call it discourse with dope people. And this particular guest I think is extra dope. Not that I'm biased or anything. I'm your host John Piro here. Now, before we get to this awesome interview, I want to note that any opinions I express are my own and not those of my law firm Zuber Lawler. For example, if I was to say that my guest's, company name is one of my top two favorite words to say in the cannabis industry, that'd be my own opinion and not that of Zuber Lawler. And as I always like to do for these video interviews, I like to give a quick prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy. All dogs and children like mine that are on spring break remain quiet, and my Amazon Prime another time. Amen. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing Trent Woloveck, the Chief Strategy Officer at Jushi, right? It just rolls off the tongue, Trent. What can I say? I want to thank you, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me for this discourse / Cannaconvo.
Morning, John. Appreciate you having me on and looking forward to the conversation for sure.
Yeah. So I want to give a little bit of background as to why I was really excited about having Trent on the podcast, right? So one, we had the pleasure, moderated a panel with you at Benzinga. And then I was, in my job doing some research for, a big fish client in terms of different markets of interest and everything. And I stumbled upon, this interesting point about, I think the town of West Memphis, or also in how Illinois being next to these population bases in Tennessee, which is not going to be flipping the dial to legalization anytime soon. And I'm like, aha, I found something. Big population. They're going to cross the border. And literally the next day, an article comes out specifically about this population jumping the border to buy legal weed. And lo and behold, in the article is a quote from none other than my current podcast guest, which is why he has the title. He has the word strategy in his title, which I always think basically that anyone who has strategy in their job title is just a very, very smart badass. So I'm excited to have you here, Trent. I think a lot of interesting things to discuss. So the first topic that I want to touch upon, this came up in a prior podcast and it kind of clicked in my head a little bit, right? So allow me to set the scene here, right? So most other industries, consumer goods and everything are progressing from retail to delivery, right? Amazon is winning by function of, economies of scale created, cost savings, not having physical locations and convenience. And the pandemic only seemed to accelerate this, right? So physical locations to delivery in most industries. The cannabis industry is unique in so many ways. And one particular way is, for decades, the illicit market had to operate in the shadows. And so it really was delivery focused. But now, as the things are coming into the light, all of these state markets are being set up. There is a large emphasis on retail, specifically amongst, some of the biggest companies in the cannabis industry. And yet, in some of the more mature markets, we are seeing delivery as becoming more popular in terms of numbers. There are states coming online now, like New York and New Jersey, that will have delivery from the beginning in certain respects. So I'm kind of curious to know, your thoughts on this. As someone who has a great overview of the industry, what we're going to see develop in the industry in terms of retail and delivery and the roles that they're going to play, that we see now, and why there's such an emphasis on retail and how things will develop, in your opinion.
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me and all the kind words. Sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm smart. I'll take both. As far as retail goes in cannabis, I think it's a super interesting kind of dichotomy of how people and a consumer thinks, both from a patient perspective and then an adult use consumer. I think, there's two different consumers that are in cannabis right now. And so, I think it's first important to acknowledge, that piece. Going off of medical first, I think, that's really what we've built this industry up from. A plant that is able to, help alleviate certain, qualifying conditions and what people want to get out of. And so, I think a retail storefront in that scenario is extremely important as you open markets up to medical cannabis and, quite frankly, initial adult use cannabis markets, because, unlike Amazon, who's started delivering books, everybody knew what a book was. Books weren't outlawed, although some people are trying to outlaw books now, but whole nother part.
We're not going to go into that.
And so I think that's a first point of delineation that we need to look at and understand from a cannabis perspective, which is, this has been something that, a lot of people aren't familiar with, or if they are familiar with cannabis, it's, hey, my dealer kicked me down this, dime bag of Blue Dream. We don't even know if it was Blue Dream, but that's kind of what has been taught to the masses about cannabis. Just consume flower or consume a vape and you're good. You're just going to get high. And so there is so much more to these products now than that. And so I think having a retail storefront for medical, somebody that's trying to help with their insomnia or have chronic pain or, name the litany of other things that it can help with, that retail storefront for that education, I think is something that's super important to have that dialogue between, in Virginia, where we have pharmacists, in Pennsylvania, where we have pharmacists, like real medical professionals that went to school and got trained on this stuff. Having that conversation is something that's, super important as people get, more aware of what cannabis can do. So, I think that's an important piece. As you get into the more mature adult use markets, obviously people are going to be, more and more comfortable with what they've purchased in the past. However, they still want to come in and swing by, pick up, their cannabis on their way home from the grocery store or from work or what have you. Liquor, there's Drizzly, but I still go to the liquor store quite a bit. Alcohol and prescription drugs, I feel like, are just a little bit different than, books and groceries, quite frankly. And so with that being said, though, a retail spot that is on Main and Main in a high travel, high density area, or out in the suburbs where there's not as many of them retail still works for sure, even in a mature medical market or a mature adult use market. And so, that's a huge positive. And, keep in mind, a retail storefront in cannabis is not just a retail storefront. For Jushi, where we have 66+% of our business ordered through our e-commerce platform, we just launched an app called the Hello Club, which is our rewards and loyalty program as well, where 10% of our orders come through. That's still a digital platform. I can't deliver in some markets. I can deliver in other markets, but I can tell you, in a state like Virginia where I can deliver, I'm not delivering, but maybe 10% of my revenue through my retail stores. People still want to come in and pick up their cannabis. You've seen companies in California try to build a delivery system and fail, quite frankly. Pubco's Diana Med is one that pops straight to my head. It's an interesting conversation, but as you think about Amazon and you think about how people want to get delivery quicker and quicker and quicker. First, it was like, okay, if I get delivery in a week, yeah, that's okay. It's not like the best, but it's okay. And then, then it was 2 days. Now it's like 2 hours. And so the business that Amazon's trying to figure out is that kind of last mile delivery is what we, read and hear about all the time. And so I view cannabis delivery not as an Amazon thing, because they bought Whole Foods, well, for a litany of different reasons, but they wanted to have a retail distribution point to get to the masses as quickly as possible. That was the real big reason why, Bezos did that transaction. I view cannabis more like Domino's, Jushi's, Beyond Hello stores. And as we continue to, ramp up retail stores, you better be able to deliver your cannabis, quicker than you can get a Domino's pizza. So building a retail channel and outlet from a technology perspective, which is what we're doing, modeled after Domino's, with using the Domino's as the hub and spoke, is kind of how we think that industry will progress from a delivery perspective, because people want cannabis now. And so I think that's a very important delivery aspect moving forward, as people continue to think through and strategize about how cannabis delivery is going to work. And then look, your retail store has, 5 distribution points. People can come in and shop on the floor. They can do an express pickup. They can do curbside. They're going to be able to do drive-through, and then you have delivery. And so that one brick and mortar retail store is not just one brick and mortar retail store. That turns into a 5-spoke distribution hub for the business.
I feel like there are only maybe 8 points on that I want to jump off of, because that was a fantastic comprehensive answer. So you talk about, you mentioned the 2 different types of consumers, and in that, instance, you were talking about medical versus adult use, right? Yep. But the other, I think, way that people slice down consumers in terms of products and everything are what I like to call, because, this is all about the persistent pursuit of perfect pop puns and awesome alliteration, the connoisseurs, typically flower smokers, right? They'll go down to the detail of knowing the strains and possibly the terpenes that they like, and the kind of curious that, as like Secretary of the Cannabis Beverage Association, beverages are small but growing, right? The people, and some of these folks in kind of curious just straight up will never smoke anything. So edibles, beverages, vape sometimes, those cater to them more. So I'm curious to know your thoughts, and also, you actually have data from this app, which I find very interesting, the percentage of your, orders that come in via that. Do you have thoughts in terms of how you see, these 2 groups ordering from the app versus coming in the store, and the different types of products? I'm curious to know what you've kind of, noticed, or trends that you see with respect to that breakdown.
Yeah, so I laugh at this question every single time I get asked it, because if you go back and listen to my podcasts in like 2013, 2014, 2015, I was one of those guys that were like, hoorah, like, vapes and concentrates and infused products are going to take over cannabis. And, you're going to see like a 70-30 mix for other products versus flower. And boy, was I wrong. Thank God I didn't do that. Your guess the future. Maybe I'll do that later. But luckily I didn't say that again, because I'd probably look back in 5 years and have my foot in my mouth again. Because look, we saw it in Colorado, where, I was the president of the Green Solution, and I think by the time we left, we had 20 plus stores, and I've, built out and looked at businesses, across the country, quite frankly, across the world. And every single time, no matter what, flower just sticks at that 55 to 65%. If you include pre-rolls and infused pre-rolls, which I do call that flower, you're around that 65%, and, maybe down to 60, maybe 55 if you're too high of price on flower, because, distillate vape usually comes down quicker. But from a data perspective, from a customer perspective, I like to say we have, Biff Tannen's almanac. We've seen the future in other states, and we can prepare for that in, new markets that we're getting into, or, markets that are ramping up. And so, I don't need to sit there and produce something that's not going to sell, versus, let's focus on producing, vape cartridges and, the best possible flower. You talk about the canna curious consumer versus the person that's the heavy user. The people that know cannabis will price shop people, that are right around in their general area. They're going to hunt for, the new hot strain, if you will, and they're going to look for the highest potency, quite frankly. That's just how those people shop. Nothing wrong with that. But what we've also seen that's super interesting is as we've seen price compression happen in pretty much every single market, those people will look at buying an ounce and hey, that ounce may have, a 17 to 20% tester of THC. But if you're selling it for 100 or 150 bucks, it doesn't matter. And so you're starting to see that with, us as Jushi, where, we have our 3 different tiers of flower for our eights. That's called the bank. And then we have our value flower called Sachet. And Sachet kicks ass. Bank does okay. But, we're getting ready to launch, Hijinks, which is a premium brand. But we got to find the right cultivars. We got to grow the right plants. We got to get the right test. We got to do the right trimming, do the right curing, have the right packaging, so that we can, build that upper echelon brand and price point so people will purchase that. And so, that's a big deal for consumers today. And as markets, continue to mature. And so we are doing that. We are tailoring our brand portfolio, our product portfolio to that. But look, the cannabis curious consumers, they do like their gummies, the things that are discreet, but they like gummies. They don't care for ice creams or peanut butters or hot sauces or, name one of the crazy things you can put cannabis in, pretty much anything, quite frankly. But, there are certain SKUs that sell, and that's, chocolates and gummies. And, I know there's differentiating conversations and thoughts in Jushi around drinks. Look, United States is a huge consumer of drinks, but that was alcohol. What's the biggest growing drink kind of industry or sub-industry in drink right now? It's non-alc. I mean, it's growing like 20, 30, 40% year over year. And so, I'm a drinker. I have no problem saying that. I enjoy drinking because I enjoy getting a buzz. But I also know what it comes with: a hangover the next day, calories, all that stuff. And so, if I go to the bar and they're like, hey, do you want a non-alcoholic beer? I'm like, yeah, I'd rather just drink a water because I want the buzz. But if you're telling me I could get a buzz with cannabis and THC and not have any calories or not have any hangover, which is what we know happens, at least for me, I think there's a market there. Now, how fast does that adoption happen? People talk about how, the cannabis MSOs always have, these monopolies. Please, if you walk into a bar, you know what they sell? Alcohol. Alcohol has a monopoly. And so, done away with all the other stuff. And so, I think cannabis drinks with normalization, there will be a disruption. I don't know how big it will be, but if you just think about it from a macro perspective, people just enjoy going out to drink. They like to have a drink in hand. If they're in an awkward situation, what do? You put a drink up to your face and you start drinking. And so, all those things will come to fruition. And I just don't know, as, our generation and younger, continues to see the effects of alcohol and the benefits of cannabis, and you want a buzz from a recreational perspective, cannabis seems to make sense from that perspective.
I mean, the numbers are stark when I cover, like the pop polls in terms of, millennials and Gen Z, the percentages by which they favor cannabis over alcohol. I mean, it is very, very stark. And we're not going to talk about it is not even close. And I think that's, part of the thing that we're seeing in terms of why and when progress is made is because generational changes in the ages of politics, right? Yeah. There's a head of the North Carolina, forgot if it's a state senator or not, a Republican, who was the impediment, I think, to certain things progressing there. And then there are new elections, and he changed his tune to the sense that the new quote was, it might happen now because there's new blood here in this legislative body. There is younger blood always coming in, and the attitudes and preferences are so stark as people get younger in terms of preferring cannabis over alcohol. And my thing, look, in terms of beverages. I mean, think about the one single sector that will, in the industry and products, that will benefit the most when eventually something does happen federally. The economies of scale that all of a sudden will be available. That's one of the things that excites me most about it. And I need to say, Trent, as a cannabis trademark IP lawyer and geek, Hijinks might be one of the best brand names I've heard for pun, and just like, that is fantastic. I have to tip my cap. I get to say Jushi's Hijinks or whatever. I mean, like, you guys, you know how to bring the brand name game, man.
It's what happens when your chief creative director has won 2 Grammys. There's just people that are, special when it comes to that stuff. And, we do a lot of data research. We do a lot of questions around our consumers. We have 50,000+ people at our disposal. So let's figure out what works. Now, Tasteology is another example. We're going through Tasteology and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just a terrible name for a brand. And then he's like, no, it tests great. I'm like, let's just call it, one infused, like the number one, because, back in the phone book days, people were like AA auto or AA whatever, because you wanted to be at the top of the list. And how, it works with your e-commerce, it goes by alphabetical order. And so I was like, let's just put one up there. No. So we long story short, we launched Tasteology in Massachusetts with our gummies, and we're now selling 2.5 times the amount of gummies that we had our old brand that we took over from the existing operators. And so, it's part of the process, but not to toot the Jushi horn too much. But when you have the right people in the right places, making the right decisions, you get the proper outcomes. And that's, what we've prided ourselves on since, the foundation of Jushi in, 2018. So
that's great. So are we talking about like spoken audiobook Grammys here, or like legit music Grammys?
No, like legit. I think it was Snow Patrol 2 years ago was his last, for the cover album. He won the Grammy for it. His name's Andreas Newman. He does pictures for all the big rock bands, Snow Patrol. Oh man, I'm not a big rock guy, so I'm struggling with it.
You answered the question. It was a little aside because I heard I'm a big music guy, so that is very, very cool.
He's a good guy to have on your podcast too, by the way. He could talk to you for hours upon hours.
All right, there we go. So I'm going to keep in mind there. Yeah, I know. You're tooting that Jushi horn there, like you said. So I always, since you are someone who, strategizes in the industry, going to keep on leaning into that. A huge thing, obviously, and one that is idiosyncratic to the US. I'm curious to see how it's going to shift. Let's talk about hemp-derived cannabinoids, legalized essentially by the Farm Bill, all sorts of things that developed since then. You have psychoactive products available at gas stations all over the place, not subject to the same type of regulation or testing whatsoever. You have court decisions saying Delta 8 is okay and legal. Then you have something recent, I'm just kind of giving this overview here, the DEA stepping in when we're talking about THCO, right? Just weeks after some scientists said, hey, you smoke this stuff, it might poke hole in your lungs, just like the vaping crisis of 2018 in the unregulated market. And then you have, other psychoactive cannabinoids like HHC that, might, go through drug tests. And all of this impacts the folks who operate in the state licensed markets, and who are struggling in some respects in terms of crashing prices. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that interplay when things might shift, because I know you like to keep eye on political things. I have my own theories about how the 2023 Farm Bill is where something will happen in this regard. So I just want to hear you riff, man, about that topic.
Yeah. I got to say, it's disheartening and saddening, quite frankly, as somebody that has been full-time in the industry since 2012 and made my first investment in 2009. And, all the hard work that a lot of people have done, around cannabis and, bringing it above board and into a regulated market. People that use shortcuts will have their day and time to answer those questions. And people that think that just because it's 0.3% dry weight for it, hemp and biomass and mix and blah, 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 they'll have their day and time that they're going to have to answer some pretty hard questions, because when I look at the pharmaceutical pharmacology, and I've had a lot of people look at this, and oh, by the way, just this past weekend, I got blasted on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, about a product that had 2 milligrams of THC per can and 4 milligrams of CBD per can. And they were saying that that's below 0.3% THC. When you talk about active cannabinoids or any active ingredient, it's the dry weight. And so when you have a pill, and I take a Tylenol 500 mgs and I take a Tylenol 100 mgs, the pill's the same size, the weight's the same size, but the active ingredient is different. So they treat those two pills different. And so, I think, these people that are trying to run shortcuts are going to be in trouble. I get that there are people trying to do it above board and they think they're doing it the correct way. But when I see a product that gets funneled into Virginia and it says 60 mgs of active cannabinoids per dose, and then I look at the C of A and it clearly states that the C of A, it says 71 milligrams per dose. I'm good at math. That's an 18+% difference between what it's saying on the package and what it's actually in the bottle. I could never pass that through any state testing in the world, like in the US, let alone the world. I definitely not in the world. And so okay, there's like knock number one. Okay, in Virginia, where I have 6 months for product, kind of the standard, best practice for cannabis is kind of 12 months. That C of A said January of 2020, didn't even give you an exact date. And then it said it's good until January of 2023. That seems kind of weird. Do you have stability testing on that? Do you, all these things from a consumer safety perspective. And then the last but not the least, and probably my favorite. So this was a tincture. It's in a 100 ml jar. So do you know the size of a 5-hour energy? It's 57 mLs. So 100 mLs is not that much bigger. I mean, I shoot back a 5-hour energy, no problem. Any adult can. So about maybe a little bit more than, or a little less than double the size. There were 216 milligrams of THC in that bottle. And so if there's a truck driver, let's just say that's, man, I heard CBD helps me relax and I'm just going to, drive a little bit more and then I'm going to pull over. He just shoots back half that bottle because, well, it's half the size of a 5-hour energy. He just took down 100 plus, or she just took down 100 plus mgs of THC. I don't care who you are, you're high. And so let alone if they chug back the whole thing, which was 218 milligrams. And so, I don't mention the name. I don't mention the product on purpose. It's just a public safety thing. None of those three items would fly in a regulated cannabis market. It just doesn't. Oh, by the way, the cannabinoids were tested in Wisconsin and the everything else was tested in Colorado. That's a whole nother question and can of worms, but it's interesting. I'm sure there are good actors within the hemp space that are trying to do it correctly. They're still not. But then you have the bad actors that are making the Delta 8, the Delta 0, the Delta X, the Delta whatever, that are getting people high. I hate to keep going back to Virginia. I'll use Pennsylvania, but there were gummies, Delta 8 gummies, that had heroin and fentanyl in them. In Pennsylvania and outside of Philly, I mean, that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to have safe product for people to consume that want to consume cannabis in the proper way. That's the complete opposite of everything people in this industry have worked for. And it's disgusting, quite frankly. And if you don't think that it's the cartels and organized crime running that distribution channel, you're just naive. Those people want to get you as high as humanly possible, get you fixed on a kick so you come back. And then they don't care if you die. They're just on to the next person. I do care if people die. I do care if a 4-year-old eats his mom's gummies and dies. That's not a good thing. That's what happened in Virginia. And so we're running around in circles because, politicians, both at the state level and at the federal level, want to bury their head in the sand and just say, this isn't in my community. It doesn't impact my people. And that's just wrong. 92% of the constituents want federal normalization around medical cannabis. 68% on a Gallup poll, not like some schmucky cannabis poll, a Gallup poll said they want normalization of adult use cannabis in the United States. It like you talked about it and you touched on it earlier. This isn't a bipartisan thing anymore. That's easy. This is young versus old, point blank. This is young versus old. And the old people, still think they're Nancy Reagan and they're Ronald Reagan. That's where we're at today, unfortunately, in politics.
Yes. Once again, many, many jump off points there. It's not just one Gallup poll, right? These are Gallup polls now for years, running, consistent, support, growing incrementally. And in all those demographics, I like to put out, stats in the podcast that I call like conservative grandma stats, like the ones that could help convince your conservative grandma to be down with it. And even that demographic now, plurality favor it, right? Every single demographic, no matter how you slice it, religious, social conservatives, also plurality favor it. So I think that that's really interesting. Do you think that, so I think you touch upon a lot of, the issues with, hemp-derived cannabinoids and how the products are being sold and marketed and the large risks there, actual physical risk to people and their health, and certainly risks of not helping the stigma that we're trying to fight here in terms of how these products can actually help people and should be considered, a drug just like alcohol and a less harmful one at that. So now my question is, this is also now the hemp-derived cannabinoids. This is a multi-billion dollar market which employs a lot of people. And so my question is, when do you think, that there may be some changes, this upcoming farm bill? And my question is it, and I think like too big to fail, but is it too entrenched to fully, go away when there could be a lot of lobbying dollars spent to continue that industry in much the same way that it currently is operating? Curious for your thoughts on that.
Look, the states are having to take this into their own hands again, just like cannabis. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing a lot of states start to enact rules, regs, legislation to protect consumers, and rightfully so. I hear you about the hemp farmers and all those jobs and dollars. John, do you know how big the industrial hemp industry actually is? What the disruption of that technology could do? We've done a study on this. $7 trillion. We aren't even a scuff on the shoe of that ass. It's $7 trillion when you look at, building materials, other energy forms, all that stuff is $7 trillion. We're happy as cannabis if that's like, 100 billion, 150 billion. I think that's like the top end of the market. And so the hemp bill was never around consumable cannabinoids. It was never around active cannabinoids. It was around industrial hemp. My paper should be printed on hemp, not cotton. Okay. My car should be made out of hemp, not, blah, 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 carbon fiber. My house should be made out of hempcrete, not out of blah, 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 blah. All those things, those are real, industries. I mean, that's a $7 trillion disruptor. So the $100 billion or the couple $1 billion, that's, the ingestible hemp or whatever you want to call it, there's plenty of other opportunity for those folks and those jobs to be able to do what it actually was supposed to do. So I'm not a person here to put people out of jobs. I'm a problem solver. I mean, that's what my job is.
A strategist, if you will.
I get paid to see around corners. And I get paid to know what's going to happen in 30 days and 60 days and a year, of 5 years, what have you. And so this idea or this concept that hemp industry dies because they lose active cannabinoid production is a farce, and a big one at that. I'll give you one more example. So Kodak, the people that used to develop film, who built like a whole city outside of Rochester, New York. So President Trump gave them the right to make active ingredients for pharmaceutical groups. That stock went from like 30 cents to I think like $6, $7, $8, $9 overnight. So if you want to produce cannabinoids to put them into a system, just like Kodak could have into the pharmaceutical system, hemp people can do that. In Virginia, I can buy any cannabinoid outside of THC to be able to make a product to support small farmers and processors. And so this whole concept, this whole idea that Jushi or MSOs are trying to, kill this or kill that, it's just factually wrong, because we're providing solutions and an outlet. I'm trying to ensure a 4-year-old doesn't die again, because whether it's right or wrong, I mean, that's blood on my hands. I have a license. I have a solution in Virginia. That's a weight on my shoulder every single day. And I have a solution. And when people aren't able to help, get there or don't want to get there, that's very painful for me.
So, Trent, you said there, right, that your job is you get paid to know and try and predict what's going to happen in the future. So I think that means that, as we're nearing the end of our time, we got to circle back now and box you into some predictions that you make that we're going to publish publicly and circle back to periodically to see how right and wrong you were. No, I'm kidding. I'm messing around. No, I always like to play, right? I still haven't settled upon whether or not we're going to call it Tokerdamus or Smokerdamus. Dub yourself what you will. I mean, you've alluded to some of your thoughts about the future, but I'm just curious to know in any little facet of the industry or otherwise, what is something that you find interesting, some trend or something, some prediction that you want to make about legalization on a federal level and the timeline? Once again, just want to hear you, riff with that strategic mind of yours, or complex strategery, if you want me to go with a really, really dated SNL presidential reference.
I'll go with Tokerdamus. I like that one better, just because my name starts with a T. Nothing more, nothing less than that.
We appreciate the alliteration here. So yes. Please.
Look, I think we've been in a really tough patch for cannabis. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The lack of federal reform has caused people like myself that started in this industry as a small mom and pop business to go out of business, and they will continue to go out of business. The people that, have put these programs in place are gone and done and out because the capital markets are done, dusted, zero. And so even if I want a license, or my brother want a license, there's no money to be able to build out that license. And so I think that's a super unfortunate, outcome that we've had. And, I think the industry has continued to educate around that, because we do want people to be able to build and impact their community. And that was the whole idea or concept or ethos of just cannabis in general. And so I am very hopeful that in the next 6 to 12 months, we see some form of safe banking done and passed.
Wow.
I still do have hope for that. I think rescheduling is a very, very complex issue that, people are going to continue to have to look at. Fingers crossed it turns into a political play and not like anything else play.
I saw that article saying Biden might want to move on that before 2024 because it could pay dividends with younger voters.
Look, he played that card in 2022 midterm, and it saved his ass. I mean, outside of the Republicans voting that women shouldn't be able to do anything with their bodies that they don't want to, but let's set that one aside. I think cannabis was another big thing.
So it was smoke and mirrors, because a lot of it really was for show and not substance.
And so that was going to be my point. Young voters, my age and below, I'm 37 and below. You used to be able to may have gotten away with that because, it's this big headline and nobody really follows up, or it just kind of gets swept under the rug. People know now. People know what it is you're doing, and if you follow through, or what that promise was made. And if you don't follow through, they will not vote for you again. People will not vote for you again. Younger people will not vote for you again. And so, I think you're going to see this one more grasp of air in 2024. And then that balloon's going to pop thereafter, because I couldn't believe it in 2020. And I can't believe I'm about to say it again in 2024. Donald Trump and Joe Biden will both be older than Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. That's pathetic. And so I just think at some point there needs to be a flip. And when that flip happens, it's going to be pretty dramatic. Let's hope so, at least. So throw that in the non-cannabis prediction. But I think you're going to see a big wave of younger folks get involved in government, come 2025 and beyond, because I just don't think it plays anymore. At all.
The numbers are there, like you said, in the polls, right? And they're only going to keep on getting better and better as, the population ages. And
more people turn 18, and guess what? More people die too. And so that's just a natural evolution of what's going to happen.
I really appreciated some of the real, kind of blunt, pun intended, thoughts here on some of the things that you've talked about. But it's always a pleasure, to sit down with a like-minded individual such as yourself, and time is our most limited resource. So I really appreciate your taking the time, to join us for this. So a big, big thank you for that. And I think we hit our time limit. So I really appreciate your joining, Trent. And I really think that the listeners are going to enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So thanks, buddy.
Thanks, John. Have a great day.